All right, so let's talk about some of these mechanics today, okay? So this back foot here, right, unless we have basically hip ER or IR deficiencies, we want to have this back foot here facing flat towards the person recording, or basically in a straight line in general, okay, like that right there. But as we begin to throw, you'll notice he turns it there. Now, if we're doing right a preset in which our hip is facing forward with their foot, then that's fine. But the issue is I don't think we're trying to do that here. So because of that, right, we're going to see some issues are going to arise as soon as that front foot lifts. But if we were to preset that back foot, it actually needs to be facing towards the person we're throwing like that. But that being said, let's kind of jump into this a little bit more. So as he picks up this front leg here, you'll notice as soon as he gets to peak leg lift, he immediately already goes and begins to sit in this hip area, this knee area, and even down to this ankle. And a lot of it's because of how we preset this foot to begin with, right? If we go and we take this foot and turn it flat this way, that's going to fix some of these issues. But all that being said, let's continue to talk about it. So as he goes down the mound, or in the flat ground in general, right, mound throwing or not mound throwing, we need to have our hip, our knee, and our ankle all twisting back towards second base, right? We call it torsion, okay? Now you're probably wondering, so when should he sit in his back leg? He should begin to sit in his back leg now, as we create that first movement forward. And then we twist our ankle, knee, and hip backwards. Now, look, he's a young kid. He's probably going to lack mobility, and he's definitely going to lack strength. So I would definitely recommend some mobility, and most importantly, I'd recommend one-legged squats, assisted pistol squats, and so much more to help out with leg strength. Because if you don't have leg strength or mobility, it's kind of almost impossible to pitch properly. But all that being said, let's continue to go. So as we go down this little slope here, I notice that we're not creating counter rotation back, which basically means twisting this trunk backwards towards like the house in the back photo. Am I sitting there saying twist all the way back? No. I'm sitting there saying take this front shoulder here, right? And this front shoulder basically needs to go and be facing the catcher almost, or whoever he's throwing to. Another thing I see as well is this front glove, okay? This front glove should never, ever, ever be that far out. At most, it should be in this position here, right, the entire way through until we're about to land. But if you notice, right, obviously the glove's going to move naturally because his body's moving down. But that glove, realistically, whenever he lands, should be here, away from his body, or higher up here, but away from his body. But instead, it's tucked in. Now, at front foot strike right here, okay, he does something really well, actually. We want this front foot to be slightly closed off about 1 to 2 o'clock, and we want this front leg, right, in general, to basically go and be about 2 to 4 inches across her body, which it looks like he has that. Now, at front foot strike, we need this to pull backwards, these hips to pull forward, and then we need this glove basically to be closer to here and away from his body. That way we can still be somewhat counter-rotated back. Now, I will say this. Because of the fact, right, that he's someone that goes and reaches with that front leg and reaches with that front glove, he's going to be what most kids are, which is flying out and open. The other side of the token that I see is the elbow pushing forward. But as your son goes and lands and he begins to throw, we notice that this elbow, the first thing it does is dip down and then work its way up like this. And that's not really good on the arm at all. So when we land, we actually want this arm here, right, to be close to 90 as possible. So if we were to basically line this up with the shoulder, right, we would want this little angle, which is pretty close. But the issue is, because his arm is in a downward slope, we also really want this arm to technically be there at front foot strike, which is in a straight line with the elbow and shoulder joints. So this elbow right here needs to really actually be about 2 to 3 inches higher. That way it's going to be in a better spot for his shoulder and elbow to come through. But because it's low and because he pulls that glove early, his arm has no option but to basically go and, as we see here, dip down and get caught behind and then push through. So this little spot right here, right, we call this hyperangulation, which is basically where the arm is disconnected from the rest of the body. This is where a lot of damage accrues from, especially in younger throwers, because this arm's getting isolated, which basically puts valgus torque on the elbow and a lot of shoulder stress. So if we can kind of go and get this arm to where at front foot strike, our glove is not pulling early, our arm's up a little bit higher, and we basically make a 90-degree angle with our arm in a straight line with our elbow and shoulder, that will help out tremendously with arm slot and potentially arm pain and arm damage down the road. Now, as we continue to go on here, like I said, he's a type of kid that's going to be the kid that flies out, right? And so due to that, he's going to get eventually down the road elbow or shoulder pain more than likely. Or even bicep pain is another thing I see quite often with a lot of kids like that. So if we can just clean up all that, they'll help out tremendously. Now I want to talk about one more thing at the very end, or what at front foot strike should I say, and I got some at the very end, is we need to be two-piece throwers, which is basically where our hips and our shoulders separate from each other, which I kind of talked about, kind of the counter rotation. If you notice here, right, with this, you'll see that the hip, the knee, the ankle, and the arm, right, they all kind of come together versus separate. When they all come together, that's called one-piece throwing. This is guys that basically typically don't throw hard. They typically deal with arm pain because their arm has to do a lot more of the workload rather than the arm staying back, and then all those other lower parts that I just circled basically come through first. There's this fancy terminology called triple extension. If you want to go look it up online, you can. But triple extension is where all or most of the power comes from as a pitcher, which is the ankle, knee, and hip all extending at the same time. There's a lot of different sports that have triple extension involved, but point being, let's continue to get this last bit here. So at the very, very, very end, he does pronate well, which is where that thumb shows down. But due to the fact that his arm is late, draggy, and pushy, we see at the very end he kind of punches right there. That's going to put a lot of stress on that rear delt, rotator cuff muscles, and then it's also going to put a lot of what we call as valgus overload extension on the elbow. So if we can go and clean up mainly the action that I care about the most, that's the easiest fix, is not letting the elbow drop down and push up and through, and not letting the arm get outside 90 degrees and rotate basically around the body, and letting the glove kind of stay back longer. That way we're not pulling through early. And that will help kind of with basically overall mechanical structure and potential saving the arm down the road is the biggest thing, you know. But if you have any other questions, just let me know. I know there's probably a lot. I have drills and stuff like that to kind of help out with that, so just let me know if you need anything.